Topic that we were given for this unit plan was adding and subtracting within 100 in a second grade classroom. We decided to make the big idea of this unit focusing on building their addition and subtraction knowledge using any strategy that they found helpful because we know that addition and subtraction are the foundation for any higher math levels and that they both are used in everyday life and are essential for everybody's future. These are the standards that we use throughout the unit, so please take a moment to look at some of those.
Maggie and I each conducted student assessment interviews prior to implementing our unit plan to gain insight of student understanding of addition and subtraction across a variety of math problems. And from this interview, we learned that our students excelled at explaining their reasoning behind why they chose to use a certain strategy and why that strategy worked. We also learned that students would benefit from practice with word problems, specifically attending to keywords in which information is unknown. And then using that data, we began to create our first lesson plan using word problems with unknown numbers. And we also encouraged students to use a variety of strategies and manipulatives to think flexibly about the numbers. During our number talks, we also noticed that some students struggled with representing their equations using base 10 drawings, especially when subtracting numbers that weren't considered friendly. And because of that, we chose a lesson that gave students the opportunity to find the difference in a word problem using drawings or, again, those base 10 models to gain confidence using them. So on the screen is an example of my very first number talk that I did called Target Number. And so the goal with this number talk was for students to generate an equation using predetermined numbers that would total to 62. I anticipated that students would use their knowledge of doubles like 30 plus 30 and then add 2 to get to 62, or adding 31 plus 31 to get to 62, or using friendly numbers like 40 and 20 and 2 to get their total. One thing that surprised me was that students did not include subtraction in their equations, even though they were given the option to.
The number talk I chose to be my first number talk was called Represent It. Students had to use a sort of backwards reasoning for this activity. The number that is written, so in this case is 79, is actually the answer, and it was the student's job to create an equation where the answer would be 79 using addition or subtraction. At first, many of the students were confused by this, but with some redirection and just talking. The students did quickly notice that it was to be the answer. On this slide, I've put some of the anticipated strategies that I believe my students would utilize. But what surprised me is many of the students used a much longer and more complicated addition and subtraction equation than I would have predicted. Many created friendly numbers, repeated addition, or used breaking apart by place value, and were all surprisingly very, very good at explaining why they chose which strategy they did to write their equation. So overall, I was very impressed with this number talk, and it set as a great foundation for my one to come.
So on this slide is just a list of literature that we found helpful while creating our lesson plans, our unit plan. And so the Talk Moves book that we read at the beginning of the semester was particularly helpful while we were implementing our lessons. We learned that Talk Moves are used to reveal students' understanding of a topic and support deeper reasoning. And using the Talk Moves not only allowed me to gauge student learning, it also allowed the students to pause and think about why the strategies they used or the answers they came up with made sense. And the VDW book also informed my decision to encourage students to reason about why the responses made sense. And so throughout this unit, students have been asked to think flexibly about the numbers so that they have a repertoire of strategies to pull from when solving strategies. And as students begin to develop a greater sense of numbers, they are able to apply what they know and understand in different mathematical contexts. So, for instance, in my first number talk, target number, students have to reach a specific total of 62 using only the numbers that I provided. And this task encouraged them to use number relationships and develop number fluency by exploring different combinations of numbers and strategies. And I feel like this task kind of aligned with the content in the VDW book because he defines reasoning strategies as flexible methods to compute that are based on a person's understanding of number and place value, which I think my students exemplified when they were engaging with this number talk.
Between Mariah and I, we found that there were two talk moves that we used the most throughout this unit plan and that were the most helpful to us. The first of these is the revoicing talk, which entails a student's answer and putting it into words that make more sense or use more mathematical vocabulary to build the student's understanding. Sometimes students can have the right ideas in their answer, but they give pretty vague responses. This strategy might help mitigate confusion among students and teaches them how to use clearer wording as well throughout the process. The second talk move we frequently used was the who can add on more talk move. This strategy builds off a student's previous response and challenges them to extend their learning. We noticed that many students would provide us with an answer when we asked, but often failed to explain their reasoning or were not sure how to really put it into words. Who can add on allowed other students in the group to help their peers and become an active part of the conversation while still building off their own understanding.
So my second number talk was called Fill the Grid, and students were tasked with identifying four numbers that, when added or subtracted, would result in a total of 89. Students are able to generate a variety of equations due to the flexibility of this task or this number talk. I kind of anticipated that students would decompose 89 by looking for doubles such as 40 plus 40 and then finding two numbers that would get them that last nine, which I found students use 7 and 2 a lot. Um, One student has shared that they started with 100 and then subtracted 5, 5, and 1 to get 89. Um, I did not anticipate that a student would subtract to get that number because in our last number talk, almost all the students chose addition for the equation, even though, like I said, they had the option to use subtraction as well.
My second number talk was called What Do You Notice? Now, this number talk was not necessarily designed to test students' mathematical knowledge, but more to challenge their reasonings that they used. The students were tasked with explaining why the numbers shown were grouped the way they were, and later they were shown a new number and they had to decide where that number would go in the pairings and groupings based off the reasoning that they had already gave. The students received this number talk fairly well, but towards the start, there were definitely times where the students wanted an easy answer or an equation. So it did challenge them a bit, which is where those talk moves that we've discussed really came in handy while teaching. So the ones that did understand could kind of build off of each other. So it was less me talking at them and their peers assisting one another. After reflecting and discussing this number talk with Mariah, we both agreed that we needed a greater emphasis on reasoning and explanation in our lesson, and we were able to add some of these in our warm up lessons for both of our lesson days that could further extend their learning from this.
So, as I previously mentioned, the assessment interview I conducted led me to focus my lesson on word problems and place value. And so, my warm up was I asked students to identify which of these options shown here was going to show the number 64. And in order to do this correctly, they had to think about if the numbers were in the correct place value, and they also had to understand what the squares, rods, and units represented in the base 10 drawings. For the actual activity of the lesson, students were tasked with solving word problems that would require them to use inverse operations. I asked students to show the work using drawings, equations, and base 10 models. I believe most of the students chose to use drawings, but there was like a variety among like how they showed their work with their drawings. I also noticed that students would write the numbers in expanded form first and then subtract. And then when I started to do the summarized section of my lesson by having the students present the standard algorithm that they use to solve the problem 58 minus 27. And that was intentional because I remember from our BDW book that one strategy to sequence student work is by starting with something concrete and work towards something a little more abstract. And so the next strategy I chose to sequence was a student who had drawn a base 10 model. And then I connected the model to the algorithm, highlighting where 58 and 27 were shown in both the strategies. I think this sequencing related to my goal of students understanding the importance of place value because it like clearly shows like where the tens and ones were in both of the strategies.
After reflecting on that second number talk, as I've said, I did realize, and so did Mariah, that the students would need to benefit from more comparison and more challenging their reasoning type activities to be able to explain their thinking. Our lesson day two focused on displaying different representations of numbers and allowing students to think through what they were seeing and reason around those answers. To begin the lesson, I started this warm up with a number talk from Illustrative Math, which tasked the students with finding which of the images or representations was the odd one out, as you can see on the picture. I wanted the students to have another chance to work on their comparative reasonings, but relate it more to the overall topic of adding and subtracting within 100, which they have been able to use in this warm up as well. So it was kind of both. The students were very engaged with this number talk and actually had so many answers that I had to have them turn and talk to share with one another after a while because we weren't going to have enough time for the rest of the lesson. But it was a blessing in disguise because they all got to share out their answers and feel heard and seen, but it didn't have to be in that whole group setting. So this worked out really well. So the true meat of this activity, or like the big part, aligned with the exploration part of my lesson. I split the class into partner pairings and gave them each a full set of Unifix cubes manipulatives to help them to visualize these problems better. As you can see, I believe it's question 2 on there actually has them make those cube trains physically, so they could get that more tactile, multimodal experience as well. I noticed that some students liked using these while others chose to just draw a picture instead, which I said was fine. After a majority of the students had finished, I had 4 students share out their strategies for number 3 on the sheet as part of my anticipating and monitoring guide. I purposefully chose these students who used different strategies from one another so we could have a discussion about comparing those strategies, which was very well received. Students were eager to point out the similarities and differences in their own work and that of their peers, some of which I hadn't even thought of myself. It was really great.
So I feel like implementing this unit plan has been like a great experience overall because it allowed me to see the importance of making informed decisions for my math lessons. It was also kind of fun to see how some students' areas of weaknesses progressed and improved over the semester. I loved seeing their progress, and I love getting to see all the creative strategies that students came up with to solve the problems. If I were to recommend this unit plan to another teacher, my advice would be to ensure that the content is tailored to their students' needs. Like if there is something in this unit plan that's too challenging or not challenging enough for their students, then I suggest that they revise it so that their students are getting the most out of the lesson. I would also tell teachers to emphasize to their students the importance of engaging in productive struggle and reminding that sometimes struggling is part of the learning process, and just to tell them, not to give up and that, affirm them in their math identities.
Overall, in the end, I really enjoyed getting to do this unit plan and being able to watch the students grow and learn throughout the course of the semester. The greatest thing I learned about myself upon reflecting was that experience is really the best teacher. And all those tools and things that we were learning in class are great, but until you can really apply it like we did in the field, so much of it just doesn't make sense. And then once you get to see it in action, you're like, there it is, that light bulb kind of goes off. And it's almost impossible to predict how a child will answer a question or react to something, but I've now learned that there are ways in which we can be better prepared, like that monitoring chart and anticipation guide. And if I was going to recommend this lesson for another teacher to use, I would tell them to offer multiple strategies for their students to use so that they can apply their best understanding to the topic. Because sometimes I noticed if I did have the students try one way or another, there were definitely strategies that they could figure out much better student to student. And why not? If we have the tools, why not use them? Why not allow them to do that? Um, and also, if you're going to teach this, and please emphasize the importance of addition and subtraction in our everyday lives. Maybe even give some examples with it. So I know I had talked to groups of students about what happens if you're at the grocery store or you're ordering at a restaurant. You need to know this type of math so that you can be a successful adult one day. It's very exciting. But really, thank you for having me in your class this year and for being so patient and kind. We are still learning. But thank you for allowing us to grow with you and have a great rest of the day.